Today I'll be introducing the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is perhaps the most important text of Hindu religion today. It has grown in prominence so that it is considered even outside of India as the one text by which Hinduism has been typified. The Bhagavad Gita itself, though, when we talk about it as a Hindu text, is something that owes its origin to perhaps a pre-Hindu past, or at least a past which cannot be codified as Hindu. I would say that the Bhagavad Gita is a Bhagavata text. And by Bhagavata, I mean a certain kind of approach to the Vedas and the Upanishads and the entire Indian tradition that arose sometime around the 2nd century BC and privileged approach to God which was theistic and devotional. The central character in the Bhagavata following that arose around that time into prominence is Krishna, and the central idea, which is a new idea in Hindu thought or Indian thought that arises with the Gita, is the incarnation of Krishna, or Krishna as an avatar. So with this, we can think about the Bhagavad Gita as a text that arises around the 2nd century BC. Of course, dating is always problematic, and this is a speculation, but plausible speculation. And it arises within the large epic known as the Mahabharata. There has also been some question about whether the Bhagavad Gita was created as a completely separate text from the Mahabharata, associated but separate, and later joined. But there are very strong reasons to hold, and I myself hold, that whatever we find arising in the 2nd century BC as the Bhagavad Gita arises simultaneously with the shape of the Mahabharata at that time. So it is an integral part of the Mahabharata that makes its completion around that stage. So what is the Bhagavad Gita? The Bhagavad Gita as a section of the Mahabharata talks about the prelude to the battle between the cousins that constitutes the major part of the Mahabharata. So the Kurus, the Kauravas and the Pandavas are about to go to battle on the issue of right, Dharma, and the issue of the rightful ruler of Bharata at that time. And the protagonist of the battle, or the great hero of the Pandavas, is Arjuna. Arjuna is a warrior, and his charioteer is his cousin Krishna. Krishna is a king, and Krishna has chosen to be the charioteer of Arjuna and not bear any arms during this battle. So Arjuna, as that particular section of the Mahabharata is staged, it's an extremely theatrical or dramatic situation where Arjuna, before the battle, says to Krishna that he wishes to go to the center of the battlefield and survey the two sides. And so Krishna takes Arjuna to the center of the battlefield. And Arjuna looks around and sees not only the people of his own side, the Pandavas and their allies, but the enemy ranks, who are also his cousins, which is this sense of a great fratricide which is about to begin. And not only are his cousins part of this battle, but his teachers, his grandsires, his uncles, and there is this enormous sense of an intimate community that is about to be ruptured irretrievably, irrevocably. And Arjuna says to Krishna that his nerve fails him and he cannot lift his arms against these relatives in this battle, and that this battle is not a battle of righteousness, of dharma, but of its opposite, of adharma. So the question of dharma and adharma is central to this text called the Gita. And in thinking about this, we have to go back to whatever we have looked at so far in our study of Indian thought and see that the major texts that we have looked at before this, which are the Upanishads, are texts that belong to the periphery of the polis. They belong to the mountainside or to the forest. And they are reclusive texts, texts of knowledge, texts of introspection. But the question of what to do with life has not been addressed in these texts. So what the Gita is doing is raising a new kind of philosophical question. And that new question has to do with giving meaning to our social existence. What is the meaning of social existence? Why should we act? And what is the act that is the right or just act to be done in the world? So these kinds of questions posed in this dramatic situation of the most powerful type of life activity, which is the activity of war. Can we justify existence, social existence, in the face of this type of rupture in human society? This becomes the big question that is being posed by the Gita. Now, to look at the time period between what we have considered earlier, which is the Upanishads, and the Gita, as I said, the Upanishads may begin from around the 8th century BC, and the bulk of the Upanishads have been written by about the 5th century BC. Upanishads are still being written around the 2nd century BC, and yet from about the 5th century BC to the 2nd century BC, new bodies of text have also arisen, some of which we will consider later. Mainly, we can think about the Buddha as a teacher and the kind of teaching that he gave, which is today called Buddhism. Vardhamana Mahavira as a teacher and the kind of teaching he gave, which is called Jainism. And teachings like Sankhya and Yoga that have arisen in the meantime. And these teachings have a family resemblance. They are also reclusive teachings. They teach a kind of withdrawal from society. But they are a little different from the Upanishads in that they are empirical and pragmatic texts. They do not want to pass any kind of metaphysical speculation about what lies outside of human experience. They want to analyze human experience and find a praxis or forms of praxis that will bring us solace from the problems of empirical experience. So this becomes the family resemblance of philosophies like Buddhism, Jainism, Sankhya, and yoga based on the metaphysics of Sankhya. However, we find that in the Gita, these kind of philosophies are addressed. That's one of the reasons we know that all these have intervened before the Gita. The Gita does not really address either Buddhism or Jainism, but the Gita addresses Sankhya and Yoga. The Gita also calls itself an Upanishad. So we find that these kinds of lineages are being synthesized and integrated in the Gita, which is bringing their lessons into its text, but also going further in bringing the lessons of this new kind of approach that I spoke about earlier, the devotional approach of Bhagavatism, into its text as its crest jewel. And it is raising new questions, the questions of the meaning of life, of social life, and the meaning of how to work properly in this world, how to work in a righteous manner, in what one might call a dharmic manner, a work of dharma in this world. So the essence of the situation that I started with, where Arjuna is asking Krishna why should he engage in this battle, that he really does not wish to engage in this battle, is ultimately the question of partly meaning and partly how to determine what is the right thing to be done. The Gita uses the phrase kartavyam karma. Kartavyam karma means the thing to be done, the right thing to be done. So Krishna proceeds to answer the question of Arjuna, and that answer pushes us into the dialogue of the Gita. So the Gita is another dialogic text. It is a text, as many other Upanishads are, where through the process of dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, arguments are unfolded as to how one can come to the answer of what is the right thing to be done. To get a synoptic sense of these answers, one can see that first Krishna is going to open up the doors of Sankhya, and he calls it the yoga of knowledge. And in this, he's going to say that why are you thinking that you are going to kill these people or be killed by these people? You have to realize that there is something in you that transcends the present situation and even the present life. There is something unborn in every human being, and one can actually come into contact with that pure consciousness to which whatever we experience in life is only a phenomenal surface that has little meaning. So this kind of teaching, of course, this teaching of the yoga of knowledge continues with us. Krishna calls it Sankhya Yoga, and it is also present to some extent in Buddhism. Later it is present in what we may call Advaita Vedanta, and it yields a certain kind of an attitude which is voiced by Arjuna, which is, why then should I engage in this battle at all? Is it not better that I meditate on the mountaintops to find that within myself which is free of this existence? And then Krishna embarks upon another teaching, which is what he calls the teaching of yoga. Today, the understanding of yoga, not in terms of the physical yoga of the yoga studio, but in terms of an earlier system called the Yoga Sutra, is based on Sankhya. But what Krishna is calling yoga in the Gita is a kind of yoga of works, and he calls it so, which is karma yoga. So the yoga of knowledge was connected with Sankhya. The yoga of works is connected with the idea of the philosophy called yoga. And this is really one of the most important contributions of the Gita to Indian thought and world thought. And essentially what Krishna is saying over there is that you do not know what is right from wrong. This is the very meaning of ignorance. And ignorance as avidya, which is the word from the Upanishads that we encountered already, is the very nature of our existence in this world. We are not certain of what is the right thing to do. So within this state of ignorance, to expect that Arjuna will know what is right from wrong is not really a solution. So what Krishna is saying is that yet you can know what is the right thing to do through following this yoga, this process by which you will unite with a will that is immanent in the world but not obvious. This will is the divine will at work in the world. And this divine will at work in the world can become the true worker working through you. So how can we know that? How can we arrive at that? The karma yoga that Arjuna is taught by Krishna has three major steps to it. The first step is surrender of one's works to the divine. It is saying, this is the best that I think ought to be done, but I don't know. So let me put my energy into it, but offer it to a higher force, to the divine will, which at this point I don't know, but I offer my work to the divine will with openness to that for guidance. The second step is the offering of the fruits of one's work to the divine. And the rationale for that, this that is given is that individuals work in the world due to their selfish interests. But every little work that is done by individuals in the world serves a larger and cosmic interest. That there is a divine plan and a divine working in the world. But we are not in a position to understand what that is. We only think of our limited success and failure. But if we forget about what the results should be for us, put our energy into the work, enjoy the work as the energy that flows through us, but not enjoy the fruit of the work, whether it is success or failure, we offer it to the divine, then our ego involvement in the success and failure of the work diminishes and ultimately disappears. The surrender of one's works and the surrender of the fruits of one's works diminishes the ego, makes it less and less, and brings one into a condition where one is open to a higher leading. One hears a higher voice, a greater intuition, and becomes more and more of a channel, an instrument of a higher force. That is the third step of the Karma Yoga. The third step of the Karma Yoga is to lose the sense of doership. That one is not really the originator of the agency that works in the world. That we are channels and instruments. And due to the surrender to the divine, one gradually develops that sense as the ego goes away that one is being used by a higher force to achieve its ends. This is the essence of the Karma Yoga of the Gita. The Jnana Yoga or Yoga of knowledge of the Gita is important because by it we lose our investment in this world. In other words, we have a vantage of freedom. So this vantage of freedom is not a goal in itself. This is where the Gita is differing from Sankhya, which is trying to create a unity with Purusha and drop the Prakriti. Or later schools like Advaita Vedanta, where one is not interested in the works for their own sake, but in developing a transcendental consciousness. The transcendental consciousness is important because it gives us a vantage of freedom from which one can be a true worker in the world. To be a true worker in the world, the second yoga, the yoga of works, is necessary. Then Krishna proceeds to give Arjuna the third yoga, which is really the contribution of Bhagavatism, which is that of surrender as an act of love to the divine person. The divine person of Purushottama here is Sri Krishna. So it's a theistic approach. What is being said is that Brahman of the Upanishads is the divine person, and we ourselves in our innermost being are nothing but a portion of that divine person, an eternal portion, not even a portion that is bound by this life, but as he says, Amsa Sanatana, the eternal portion of the divine person, Purushottama. And this eternal portion in its nature is devoted through love, through divine love to the divine person. So mobilizing that divine love becomes the primary motive power of bhakti yoga, or the yoga of devotion, and that makes it into the leader of the march of the jnana yoga, or yoga of knowledge, and the karma yoga, the yoga of works in the Gita. So this is how the Gita integrates three yogas, and how it also integrates the systems of Sankhya, Yoga, Bhagavata, and Vedanta, or Upanishad. And it also gives a certain kind of meaning and path of desireless divine works in the polis, in society itself. The Gita comes to its end by talking about the goal of life as being becoming an instrument and an occasion, nimitta, an occasion only for the divine worker in the world, whose purpose in the world is to create unity, loka sangraha, to hold the world together. Apart from this, the Gita introduces some really important new ideas, particularly, as I said earlier, the idea of the avatar, that is, that the divine can actually incarnate and make it easier for human beings to follow the path of righteousness, of Dharma, because when Dharma is completely obscured by the forces of confusion and undivine forces, then it is as if the soul of man is clouded over, and we need intervention. And this kind of intervention comes as a kind of leading, whether from within, or in some cases, as in this, as a direct intervention of the divine consciousness in the form of a human being known as avatar or incarnation. So these are the beautiful ideas of the Gita. It is a life affirmative, a positive text. It actually opens up a new way of being and becoming in the world, and it integrates all the various philosophies that have gone before it and presents a new path to the future.